Sir Andrew's realisation that he is, after all, an isolated outsider comes towards the end of the play, and as a result only darkens the overwhelmingly positive atmosphere of the play slightly. The atmosphere of Mice and Men is far less light-hearted, partly because, with the exception of Lenny, the characters know full well how they stand with other people. The characters know instinctively that they are individuals fighting for both financial and mental survival. Unlike in Twelfth Night, the concept of a caring community or a household that looks out for its members and has fun together just doesn't exist. Crooks knows that he is black and has no hope of forming a genuine, equal friendship or relationship with anyone else on the ranch. Curley's wife knows that she is trapped in a relationship with a man who doesn't love her or desire to communicate with her on any meaningful level. What's worse, there are seemingly no other women for her to chat to on the ranch, leaving her to risk occasional conversations with men, knowing this may send her husband into a paroxysm of frenzied jealousy. And then there is Candy, the old swamper on the ranch, general handyman and sweeper with a missing right hand. Within days of meeting the newcomers to the ranch, George and Lenny, desperation and loneliness lead to him making a startling offer. In part 3, George and Lenny are having their customary chat about their dream. Actually, this phrasing is a little misleading, as what actually happens is that Lenny, the desperately childlike man with the strength of a beast, begs George to tell him about a future in which they own their own piece of land and keep rabbits. George, after some reluctance, generally gives in, knowing in the back of his mind that such a scenario almost certainly will never come to fruition. However, on this occasion the men are overheard by Candy, who gets excited extremely quickly. He reveals that by the end of the month he will have $350 and suggests hopefully to George, "Suppose I went in with you guys. That's $350 I'd put in. I ain't much good, but I could cook and tend the chickens and hold the garden some. How'd that be?" This is an extraordinary offer which smacks of sheer desperation and an incredibly low sense of worth. Having only known George and Lenny for a few days, Candy knows full well that he cannot appeal to them on a personal level. And so, that leaves him to describe himself in terms of potential usefulness on a ranch, which, as an old man with a missing hand, doesn't make him a particularly attractive proposition. Candy admits openly, "I ain't much good," and tries to compensate with this for his financial offer. George reveals that he and Lenny only have $10 between us. Candy has 30 times this, yet this doesn't put him off in the slightest. He even offers to make a will and leave my share to you guys in case I kick off, because I ain't got no relatives nor nothing. On the one hand, Candy's offer is an uplifting one, as it transforms Lenny and especially George's dream into something that could become reality. George believes he could buy the land for $450. On the other hand, the fact that Candy can offer to give his entire life savings, most of it given to him following an accident which left him a cripple, to two complete strangers who he barely knows, emphasises the terrible, desperate loneliness of life in 1930s America. Candy will risk virtually anything to get out of a ranch, which offers only poorly paid work and an uncaring macho environment, which resulted in his only friend, his dog, being shot. The harsh realities of life during the Great Depression are shown when Candy says a little later in the chapter, "They'll can me pretty soon. Just as soon as I can't swamp out no bunkhouse, they'll put me on the county." The use of the American verb can means to stop doing something, to get rid of, dispose of, in a trash can if you like. For this is how Candy will be treated once he is unable to work properly, tossed out into the gutter. In the world of Mice and Men, if you can't work and contribute, you are nothing. Candy is a lonely old man struggling to survive and secure his own future. Viola, in Twelfth Night, is a young woman who also finds herself in perilous circumstances. Shipwrecked on foreign, unknown shores, she takes the startling decision to disguise herself as a young man so she can serve the Duke Orsino. The Countess Olivia cannot be applied to due to her state of mourning. Viola carries out this disguise extremely successfully, but it does mean that she has erected a barrier between herself and the people she spends time with. This barrier leaves Viola emotionally isolated and trapped when she very quickly falls in love with the Duke. As a man named Cesario, Viola has no chance of attracting the love of the Duke. Although there is currently a significant debate in society about whether homosexual couples should be able to marry in church, in Elizabethan times there was no such debate, and any homosexual practices were driven firmly underground. The love Viola develops for Orsino results in her feeling enormously frustrated and forced to be even more passive than the typical Elizabethan woman brought up in a society which conventionalised men making the first move in relationships. In Act 2, Scene 4, Viola finds a way to vent some of this frustration by describing the unrequited feelings of love of her father's daughter. She tells Orsino, "My father had a daughter loved a man, as it might be perhaps, were I a woman, I should your lordship." Note Viola's intelligent use of language. She avoids telling a direct lie by using the unusual phrase, "my father had a daughter," which the audience knows means herself, but Orsino will believe refers to a sister. She describes the love of this father's daughter. She never told her love, but let concealment, like a worm in the bud, feed on her damask cheek. The passivity of the female lover is striking. Shakespeare makes concealment, rather than the woman, the subject, and this desire to hide passion results in her rose-coloured damask cheeks being slowly devoured and changing colour from rose to pale. The simile is a horrible one, conjuring up images of a worm slowly but surely eating its way through a small part of a plant that hasn't even had time to develop into a full flower or leaf. Viola is both revealing to the audience, but not Orsino, her own feelings of love, but also highlighting how both her own self-imposed disguise and society's systems of men playing the leading role in initiating relationships have resulted in terrible emotional loneliness. The Duke asks whether her sister, his words, not hers, died due to her love, and receives the enigmatic response, "I am all the daughters of my father's house, and all the brothers too, and yet I know not." Viola's refusal to confirm or deny Orsino's question suggests that, at this stage in the play, she cannot rule out the possibility of herself dying of a broken heart. Shakespeare shows that disguises can be useful, but also have unintended consequences, such as terrible internal isolation and an inability to reveal the complete truth about your feelings. Viola has a happy ending at the end of Twelfth Night. With the arrival of her twin brother Sebastian on stage, she is forced to unmask herself, and remarkably, even though Orsino has previously seen her as a young man, and therefore has never considered the possibility of a romantic liaison, he rapidly proposes marriage. The ending to Of Mice and Men is far less gay. This essay is principally focused on the loneliness of three important characters from the novel, Crooks, Curley's wife and Candy. However, there are two characters who aren't isolated, who do have people to care for them, namely George and Lenny. The two men go round together and genuinely care about each other. Indeed, in part 2, the ranch owner comments on their striking friendship. "I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. I just like to know what your interest is." In the grim landscape of Mice and Men, people in general don't bother about other people. They just look out for themselves, making the ranch owner so suspicious of why George seems to be so protective of his bigger friend. Whenever George tells Lenny the dream of the land they're going to own together, he always includes the refrain, "We got a future. We got someone to talk to that gives a damn about us. I got you to look after me, and you got me to look after you." Perhaps a similarity could be drawn between the two friends and Sir Toby and Sir Andrew in Twelfth Night. In Twelfth Night, when the simple Sir Andrew uses the touching first-person plural, will be dressed together. He is cruelly rebuffed by Sir Toby. In Of Mice and Men, in spite of occasional frustrated outbursts, when the simple Lenny uses the unifying first-person plural, "Tell about what we're gonna have in the garden and about the rabbits," George will generally respond to make his friend happy. This is why the ending to Of Mice and Men is so tragic, and why it continues to bring a lump to my throat each time I read it. In the 1930s America depicted by Steinbeck, people are lonely. People move around from ranch to ranch in search of work, not getting too close to others. People just don't have friends. The relationship between George and Lenny is the only exception to this insistence on isolation, yet by the end of the novel, it is no more. Lenny lies dead in the bush. shot by George to save him from the rampaging wrath of Curley, Carlson and their miserable mob. The relationship between the only men who could use the first-person plural we and genuinely mean it has come to an abrupt end, leaving the final line to the minor character Carlson, only previously famous for insisting on Candy's old dog being killed. He asks, with a puzzled look on his face, referring to George and Slim, "Now what the hell you suppose is eating them two guys?" In the landscape of Mice and Men, the concept of a man being upset by another man's death is inexplicable, extraordinary. The landscape of Mice and Men is one in which people exist rather than live, be rather than love. And as such, it is a barren, barren world of loneliness and isolation. Whereas Twelfth Night, putting aside the slightly uncomfortable questions of Malvolio and Sir Andrew, can celebrate the loves and coming together of its main characters, of Mice and Men paints a far bleaker picture of a world of little light, little hope, little reason for optimism. Yes, George does walk off with Slim at the end, but this is not enough to displace the overall gloom caused by the death of an essentially kind-hearted, loving man such as Lenny, a man who has paradoxically killed another essentially innocent person, Curley's wife, by breaking her neck. You've been watching Schofield on Shakespeare. Good afternoon.